Welcome to the Animal Liberation Hour, where we seek insight from animal rights and liberation activists around the world so that we can think, reflect, learn, and be inspired. My name's Trey. I am back with you. It's been a while since I've hosted an episode. I've still been working behind the scenes with the Animal Liberation Hour, but it's good to be back as a host, and I've got a really exciting guest for you today, Chrys Liptrot, the founder and CEO of International Council for Animal Welfare, also known as ICAW. Before we get into the episode, I want to remind you that the Animal Liberation Hour is a project of Animal Activism Collective. AAC has a free multinational mentorship program that helps aspiring animal rights activists, as well as those who are already activists but want to take their activism to the next level. From one-on-one mentorship to free educational resources to this podcast, AAC seeks to empower humans to fight for animals so that the world will have more activists and we can achieve liberation sooner. For more information, visit animalactivismcollective.com and follow us on social media. Chrys and I have been working together since about March of 2025. We met at the DC Summit, which was a collaboration between AAC, CAFT, and the Simple Heart. And that's when I first started working on the campaign for Marriott to go cage-free. Me personally, I consider myself to be an abolitionist, but I've really learned a lot from Chrys and ICAW about welfare and why they're doing that work and why that's important. And it's also taught me a lot about movement building, which I feel like is a personal mission of mine, as well as the mission of Animal Activism Collective. So I hope that you will listen to this conversation with an open mind and an open heart. And Chrys is also just like a really cool and interesting person. So hope you get a lot out of this. Without further delay, Chrys Liptrot. Hey everybody, welcome to the show, and I am thrilled today to be joined by Chrys, the CEO of ICAW. Thanks so much, Chrys, for taking some time to chat with me.
Thanks for having me, Trey. Excited.
Yeah, I know that right now, at the time of this recording, you're getting ready to do some stuff for a free weekend. So, I really appreciate you taking a minute to talk to me. We'll dive right in. I just want to get to know a little bit about your background. Can you just tell me how you got involved in animal rights and what that story's like?
Yeah, basically, as soon as I graduated college, I decided to dedicate my life to animal rights activism. And probably the first things I ever did was like leafleting, like vegan literature leafleting back in like 2012, 2013. And then I moved to DC, and at the time, I think DC was kind of like the epicenter of the animal rights movement. Many of the leaders in the movement were based there. A lot of the major groups were all headquartered there. And so I moved there and just started volunteering my time, working on ballot initiatives, working on some campaigns, and doing like individual outreach and stuff like that, street activism. And eventually landed a job after years of being an unpaid activist. And that job was a job that a lot of people did not want at the time in the movement. It was to be a cage-free campaigner at the Humane League. And I think at the time, like basically there were no cage-free wins at all, virtually anywhere from major companies. There was some small momentum. Some folks were working on it, but it was kind of like this bastard campaign that nobody wanted to work on because I think for folks who come from the animal rights background, it was this leap to be like switching gears from focusing on ending the use of animals to making the lives of animals better. And took this job, was making also like very, very small salary on a very small team with no resources or experience. And very quickly, like after getting my job at the Humane League and when we were starting cage-free campaigns, we immediately started seeing wins, like win after win. Basically, what we did was adapt tactics from successful pressure campaigns in other in other types of campaigns, say like anti-vivisection campaigns or anti-fur campaigns, and adapt those to digital tactics, where we were now targeting companies, focusing on targeting their executives, targeting secondary targets, all the tenets of pressure campaigns, but just in a virtual reality because we had no budget and essentially no people power. And this was successful. Won a ton of cage-free commitments almost immediately. Some of the largest companies in the world committing to go 100% cage-free. And then funding flowed into the movement. All the groups working on this campaign grew and grew and grew, and sort of like cage-free became one of the major things that the movement started working on. So anyway, it was cool to see this like sort of like from the ground up. I randomly kind of got involved in this just because I wanted to help animals, and it became like this sort of like big focus for the movement, and focusing on getting hens out of battery cages.
Yeah, that's really cool. I got my start in animal rights activism with leafleting too, so we have that in common. About what year was that when you were getting involved with cage-free campaigns?
Yeah, it was around 2015 when I started corporate campaigns, and then before that, I was kind of a volunteer working on ballot initiatives to ban cages or anti-confinement stuff, and sort of like different types of activism. But yeah, around 2015 is when I started getting involved in corporate campaigns.
So when you say that that's not really a position that anybody wanted, like, can you expand upon that a little bit? Because I know I came into the movement just about right after that in 2017. And, I guess the majority of where I was getting my content was like YouTube. Like for me, I didn't have really a lot of people around me. I went vegan when I was living in Alabama. And so, I would watch all these social media videos and kind of see what activists were doing. And very early on, from some of those, like, I guess, influencer types, I learned like, oh, like welfare is bad. Like we should be advocating that all animals, be liberated now. So was that kind of the mindset at that time in your experience from your world? And is that why you say that people didn't really want that job?
Yeah, I think at that time in the movement, now, like I think when you're doing activism, um, a lot of it is just happening, and you can't really think about like the historical context or like exactly what it means. Like most people are just motivated to help animals, and you're doing activism because you want to go out and help animals. And I think at the time there was a big divide in the movement where you had folks who were focusing on sort of like pragmatic activism. We want to reduce as much suffering as possible. There's this huge scale of suffering, and we want to do everything we can to reduce the suffering of the animals that are currently being farmed or exploited. And then there was a different faction of people who were sort of like focused on how can we bring attention to just ending animal exploitation altogether, and taking various actions that we think might lead to animal liberation. And so there's this big sort of like welfareist, abolitionist divide. I don't think I fell anywhere particularly in either of those ideologies. I just wanted to help animals. Um, and but I think for a lot of people now, when I look back, when you had sort of like major grassroots efforts sort of wrapping up because of oppression, like I think about like the Shack campaign or something like that, there's now like a vacuum where there's not a centralized source directing volunteers or grassroots activists and people leading local groups to focus on something specific. And so you had this sort of divide forming where there's groups like the Humane League who want to focus on pragmatism and suffering reduction, and then groups like DXE who are thinking about tactics that they can get media exposure and bring people in, and they're telling activists you can do these actions, and this is what's going to lead to animal liberation. And I think if you're a grassroots activist getting involved in the movement and you just want to do something to help animals, and you've got these two things set before you, and one of them is you can get hens from this type of factory farming to another type of factory farming that's better, or you've got somebody saying you could do this action and it's going to lead to animal liberation in one generation. It's kind of an easy choice to be like, oh, well, obviously I'm going to choose the animal liberation side. And so like when I first got involved in cage-free campaigns, there was this like I think excitement around pragmatic activism from a small group of people who had been doing activism for a long time. But I think for newer activists just coming into the movement, most of the excitement is going towards these actions that lead to animal liberation. And there's little crossover in between, because the argument from, I think, many of the leaders was that they're opposing sides. That if you're spending your time focusing on animal liberation tasks, you're not doing the good work of reducing suffering for animals. And if you're spending and from the abolitionist side, you're saying if you're doing this work to reduce animal suffering and focusing on animal welfare, then you're wasting your time because you're not leading to a world where animal exploitation ends. And I think in a really exciting way, where we're at in the movement now, 13 years into my activist career, is those divides are breaking down. I think less and less people are saying like these asks are opposing each other and somehow hindering one another, and rather folks are thinking like, if we can work together towards both of these ends and everything in between, whether it's liberating animals, whether it's ending the fur industry, whether it's banning foie gras, whether it's getting hens out of cages, or whether it's something even further in the welfare end of like reducing suffering for hundreds of billions of shrimp. Now it's kind of like we can work together on these things and build a unified movement where we all move forward and advance all of our goals at once, rather than sort of like fighting between another on which is the best theory of change. None of us know what's going to work exactly, but all of these things help animals, and we should be working together rather than sort of working against each other and tearing each other down. We'll work with each other and lift each other up. And I think this is like probably one of the most exciting things I've been experiencing in the last couple of years in the movement, is this ending of these kind of divides between the movement.
Yeah, I would have to agree with that. And, the story that you're telling kind of takes me back to a time, maybe about 5 years ago, when, I first got into pressure campaigns, like single issue campaigns. And I was trying to, like get some of my colleagues on board with this. And sometimes it would take a little bit of convincing. And, now I think, pressure campaigns, I mean, are incredible. Like, shout out to Coalition to Abolish the Fur Trade. You're wearing their shirt right now. That's some of the people that really inspired me to get into pressure campaigns, and what they've been able to do is really great. But I'm wondering if this divide that was happening, and I think the divide is definitely still there, even though it's changing a lot, like you said, and it's actually really exciting that I think we're becoming a more unified movement across the board, which I also think a unified animal rights movement is scary for people who are oppressing animals. So I think that's a really good thing. But do you think the divide that you were talking about, I mean, I know when I came in, like outreach was one of the big things. And I think for me, at least in my experience, where a lot of this welfarist almost being like a cuss word came from outreach, because a lot of people were saying like, if you get a chance to talk to somebody, talk to them about veganism, like not reducitarianism, or not, purchasing cage-free eggs, or humane meat, or something like that. But and I might still be on the same page with that when it comes to outreach, but with campaigns, I think it's a lot different. Would you agree with that? And do you think that that's where the divide may have originated?
I think it's possible. I mean, when I got involved in activism, it was also through outreach. I think it's all way a lot of people get involved in activism. I think when I started on my journey, like groups like Anonymous for the Voiceless or We the Free didn't exist. Like the thing everybody was doing was leafleting. So it was really groups like Vegan Outreach and groups like the Humane League who were distributing more vegan literature to people than any other groups in the movement. So that's how I got pulled in. Um, but I think like I probably tend to agree with that. I think there's like obviously a place for individual outreach and raising awareness around these issues that people just don't even know about, despite the fact that there's so many resources out there on factory farming. When you talk to the average person, they're not the knowledge gap between what they eat and how that food came into existence is still huge. And so I would say, like, if you're talking to an individual, I think it makes sense to educate them on factory farming. I think it makes sense to tell them, like, to talk to them about being vegan. But if you're talking to an institution, if we're talking about companies like Walmart who buy more food and have more power than like a majority of governments in the world, or we're talking about McDonald's or Marriott, like these enormous companies that are operating omnipresently all over the world, the first stepping stone for them like simply cannot be go vegan, or frankly even reduce the amount of eggs you're selling. Like it's not going to happen. And so like as activists, when we think about what we can be asking these companies to do the best work for animals, to start even these giant institutions on some sort of path towards being better to animals or reducing the number of animals they're selling, for me, welfare is like the clear thing that we should be advocating for. And I guess that what else I'd say for individual outreach is like, there's one thing about, it's one thing to tell people about factory farming, is one thing to tell people about going vegan, and obviously that is great and has its place. But one other thing I think that I think about now, when we see this resurgence of people power, whether it's people going to the streets and fighting to end the fur industry at individual companies, people going out in local communities and fighting restaurants to get foie gras off their menu, or people going out to protest Marriott or Ahold Delhaize or any of the major welfare campaigns going on. I think like the thing that we should be focusing on is building more activists, like folks who are willing to go to the street and take action and build a bigger and bigger movement, regardless of what issue you're working on. I think like if we want to win in the future on any of these things, whether it's welfare, whether it's liberation, whether it's, ending a particular type of factory farming, the thing that we need is more and more activists. And so like for street outreach, you're talking to an individual person, I think getting them to go vegan or trying to get them to reduce, to go vegan, or, take some sort of step towards ending their personal exploitation of animals is one thing. But if there's a world where we can get more people to get active, to do something meaningful, I think we need more activists in the space if we're ever going to hope to win and achieve our goals as a movement.
Yeah, I tend to agree with that. Obviously, that message is what Animal Activism Collective is all about. Having started out as just a mentorship program and still carrying that on, but really just trying to do whatever we can to get people engaged with animal rights in the way that they want to, and in ways that are most effective for them. And I got to say, you're doing great work as far as bringing people together on this issue. I myself had never participated in any kind of welfare campaign whatsoever until earlier this year, and that's because of you and because of Mark, who's also at ICAW. And yeah, I mean, I thought it was great. I participated in my first action, and it was pretty cool. Like everybody really brought the energy. I think you know which action I'm talking about. And yeah, it was a cool one. And honestly, I mean, I'd never really seen that kind of energy like in any kind of welfare actions I'd seen online or anything like that. But you've definitely brought me around. And I'll say when I first participated in that action, I wasn't necessarily doing that because I was crazy about welfare campaigns. It was kind of something that was sort of new to me. But the reason that I did it is because I wanted to show solidarity with the ICAW folks, because all the ICAW folks were showing solidarity with the fur campaigns and the foie gras campaigns. And I just wanted to return the favor, basically. Now that's blossomed into something else where I've kind of changed my thinking a little bit on welfare campaigns. But yeah, I would say you're doing a great job of bringing people together.
Thanks. Yeah. I mean, shout out AAC and CAFT. I mean, it's been really tremendous working in coalition with both AAC and CAFT this year. It's totally changed the way I look at activism. Even like 13 years into my career, I'm like now spending the majority of my time in houses with activists and traveling around, working on local campaigns, working on fur campaigns, working on cage-free campaigns, shrimp campaigns, whatever. Um, and I think like for me, like now when I can look back on my career and sort of like reflect on things of how we got to like where the cage-free work started to where it is now, I feel like for most of us, the feeling was like hopeless that we're ever going to get some critical mass of people to care about these issues. Like insiders cared, I think, like people who had been doing activism for a long time and decided to focus on pragmatism. I think funders cared about it because you can sell this kind of like per dollar suffering reduction thing to EAs. But like grassroots activism and even like street activism, protests, anything was never even a big part of the strategy on welfare, simply because like I don't think anybody really thought it was possible to get people to care. And I think what I've learned this year is it's a lot easier to explain the asks and have a real conversation about what we're doing, because in reality, like this is the thing I care most about in the world is ending these types of factory farming, reducing as much suffering as possible right now for animals. Like for me, this is like my main motivation in activism. But I understand like that's not where most people are at. Most people want to like end something, you know, and that makes sense. But I think like the critical difference this year has been for ICAW, I think, has been when we campaign, it's like we campaign as if we give a fuck whether or not we win. Like every single action, we give everything we have to the to winning the campaign. And I think just like coming out, showing up, and showing like we care just as much about this as we do about any other issue has been like transformative, and being able to have conversations and explain our theory of change and why we care about these campaigns. And then simultaneously, like, you know, obviously like ending battery cages, reducing animal suffering as much as possible is like my main motivation for activism. But at the same time, I would say I spend an equal amount of time these days protesting local restaurants to get them to ban foie gras, or protesting key targets to end the use of fur. And I think like that kind of solidarity is what the movement needs to see. So I would say like for an activist who's interested in pressure campaigns, but maybe doesn't know where to start, and you're kind of like thinking about whether or not to participate in the welfare actions, it's kind of like, why not? We know this is going to help a tremendous amount of animals. We know this is going to reduce a tremendous amount of suffering. You don't have to pick and choose. And I think if we're going to win on any of these issues in the future, like showing solidarity and showing up for other people's actions, even if it's not your favorite campaign or the thing that motivates you most, I think this like solidarity is the way that we build a bigger movement, and we can show all of these industries that we have the power to make changes. And so, like, I mean, shout out to you for showing up, even though it wasn't your favorite campaign when you started. But like, you know, I think that's fine, as long as like people keep showing up. Solidarity is the number one thing that's going to scare any of these industries.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I think one of the number one things that you and ICAW showed me, and it kind of sounds ridiculous and embarrassing to say out loud, but it's just that, hey, you can like work on multiple things, and you can, you know, even if it's not your favorite, which like I said, I've come around a bit more now, but you know, even if it's not your favorite, you can show solidarity with other people, and you can try to bring the movement together. You know, I don't really do outreach as much anymore, but I went to an outreach event this year because you know, I mean, I still care about that work. I care what those people are doing. You know, their activism is important too. Let's work together. And you know, sometimes some of the outreach people would hop on over to the foie gras protest afterwards too. So, yeah, I mean, yeah. I feel like at least in the time I came into the movement, there was this conditioning that you know there's a few paths that you can take, and you need to take one and figure that out, and you know, kind of push out the rest. But I want to bring it back to something you mentioned, EA. And for those listening that have never heard that term, that's effective altruism. I'm wondering if you can just briefly talk a little bit about that and then maybe kind of segue into why you decided to start ICAW, because you had a higher level position at Mercy for Animals for a while, and now you've founded this new organization. So let's go from EA and into that.
Yeah, so effective altruism is essentially a movement of people that want to focus on using their resources, whether it's time or money or anything else, to do the most amount of good in the world as possible. And so a lot of the ethos around effective altruism focuses on suffering reduction. Both could be suffering reduction for the greatest amount of humans on Earth now, could be suffering reduction for the greatest amount of humans that exist in the future, or could be suffering reduction for animals currently living in terrible conditions or animals living in terrible conditions in the future. And I think around the time that we started seeing real success with cage-free campaigns, you were talking about, a group of activists. I could count on my hand the number of people who were even focusing on anti-confinement campaigns for animals. And at THL, like 3 of us making like $20K per year. And we're getting some of the largest companies in the world to say they're going to reduce a tremendous amount of suffering for egg-laying hens, like hundreds of millions of egg-laying hens, and these are the largest companies in the U.S. and like companies like Walmart and companies like McDonald's and things like that. And so purely from a resource perspective, you're like, this is one of the most cost-effective interventions you could possibly think of. If the thing that you want to achieve is suffering reduction, we're spending virtually nothing, and we're having these huge results in a very short amount of time. And I think this became a really compelling case for the EA movement to have something to fund related to factory farming. And so for me as an activist, I'm just doing crazy shit, doing all this crazy digital stuff, shaming executives, doing secondary targets, all this stuff that we learned from other successful pressure campaigns in the animal rights movement. And I'm going to meetings with companies all over the world and meeting them face to face and sort of like threatening them with campaigns directly to their face in the boardroom. And all of a sudden, overnight, we have this influx of money from people we don't even know. And it's like millions and millions of dollars being pumped into these campaigns. And that's basically the trajectory of the work over the last decade, where we went from this tiny handful of really dedicated activists to these giant organizations. So like when I started at THL, it was 15 people or something like that. And at the time, Mercy for Animals was maybe 30 people. Animal Quality was only in Europe, and it was maybe 20 people or so. And all of a sudden, this money comes into the movement, and these organizations over the last 10 years go from, dozens of people to hundreds of people and become these huge institutions. And this is all funded essentially by the effective altruism movement, which is incredible. Way more resources into the animal rights movement. And so for so many reasons, that's been just like an incredible thing for the movement to have so many more resources. However, like what I was seeing as a campaigner, I was at the Humane League for about 5 years and then Mercy for Animals for about 5 years. Great experiences. I don't have a single bad thing to say about either of those organizations. But as a campaigner, what I was seeing was, I started my career as like one of 3 campaigners working on cage-free campaigns. I could wake up every day and I had no money and no resources and no volunteers or anything, but I could do whatever I wanted with the resources I had. And I could move super fast. Like think of an idea, and by the end of the day, I'm already executing it. And then 10 years into my career, I'm sitting sort of like at the top of a corporate program at a major animal protection organization. There's 40 other team members working on welfare campaigns around the world. And I felt somehow able to do less in that role than I was at the very beginning of my career. And maybe I just wasn't the right fit for that type of job, but I was like feeling like I've just got to reshuffle the deck and start over. And so in about July of last year, I decided to leave Mercy for Animals and start a brand new animal welfare organization. And basically the ethos of ICAW was going to be like very little bureaucracy, very little administration. Where it's going to be basically like going back to our roots of cage-free campaigning, of like people can do anything. Campaigners have a tremendous amount of autonomy to try new ideas, to do anything they want to get these companies to move. With the exception that now all of the campaigners that we're hiring have a tremendous amount of experience. Now they've got, 5, 8, 10 years of experience running campaigns. And so now we've got this collective of, around a dozen campaigners that have tremendous experience in whatever thing that they're focusing on, and a tremendous amount of autonomy to just execute whatever they think is most effective for the campaigns. And that's how ICAW got started. I think it's been really exciting just to see, even though we're a small group, like comparatively to the other welfare groups, we just have this tremendous output because we have these like super experienced, dedicated activists that are basically able to do whatever they want when they wake up in the morning to try to win these campaigns.
Yeah, that's incredible. I know you have a really great team over there. I think I've met most of the team, and yeah, everybody's really cool, has, a good amount of experience and a wealth of knowledge about campaigns, which I think is fantastic. So, would you say that maybe you could give me like an overall bird's eye view of International Council for Animal Welfare's mission? It seems like part of that is like autonomy within the organization, and obviously it's welfare. But can you dig into anything else, sort of about your mission? It seems like it's gravitating toward the grassroots a lot too.
Yeah. So I think the same. I mean, so the mission of the organization is to reduce as much animal suffering as possible. And so the issues we focus on are always focused on impactful campaigns in terms of net suffering reduction. So currently, our major campaigns are ending battery cages and implementing significant standards that will reduce the suffering of farmed shrimp, because shrimp is the number one farmed animal in the world, with like 450 billion animals farmed per year. And so like every campaign that we take on in the future will have this kind of lens. We want to reduce as much suffering for farm animals as possible right now. And I think it's the same ethos as always, as from when I started in my career, is like whatever works is what we're going to do. And so on our team currently, we've got folks who are experts in corporate negotiations. They're having phone calls, they're doing meetings, they're meeting with executives constantly for food companies across the world. We've got folks who are incredible digital campaigners, folks who know about all the ins and outs of sort of like getting at a company's vulnerabilities by targeting them through digital platforms, by working with influencers, by having creative projects. And then obviously we also have a greater investment in grassroots activism. And when we started ICAW, I didn't know exactly which direction this was going to take. And I think over time, grassroots activism has become just like a greater and greater part of what we focus on and where we're going as an organization, purely because I think it's effective. I think it's maybe the most effective thing we could be doing for animals right now is build a bigger movement that can win on multiple issues. And that's sort of how we got connected in with AAC. It's how we got connected in with CAFT, seeing these effective tactics that they're using in street activism to get individual restaurants to ban foie gras, or to get multinational companies to ban fur. It's just like going to the street, using these tactics over and over again, being strategic about who you're targeting and the ways that you're targeting leads to success. And I wasn't sure if this would be possible for the welfare work, purely because, I was nervous, like, oh, maybe some critical mass of activists aren't going to be interested in this because we can't sell the ask to them, or like they think it's sort of like, against their values. And I think over time, I've just been shocked at how untrue that is. I think the majority of activists focusing on pressure campaigns, like, first and foremost, want to win. They want to help animals, and they're also incredibly, like, intelligent and strategic in the way that they approach their activism. And when you can make this case to them of like, look, we're looking at like a multi-billion-dollar international industry that we can tackle if we simply take to the street and use effective actions and campaign like we care. And so just by virtue of showing up, explaining things to people, I think like tons and tons of activists have been interested in the campaigns, getting more involved, and ultimately winning for animals. And I think as an organization, uh, this is probably a big direction in terms of where we're headed, and investing more and more in trying to figure out how to build bigger movements that can win not only on ICAW's campaigns, but on multiple different types of pressure campaigns.
Yeah, I think that's beautiful. And just, from Animal Activism Collective's lens, when we first started the mentorship program, our goal was to just kind of be a hub for activists and, get people in. And there was really like no ego about it. We would send people, if somebody came to us and like what they were kind of wanting to do aligned with Direct Action Everywhere, for example, or PETA or some other group, we'd send them there, and that was fine. We just wanted people to get involved in activism. And for us now to be at a point where, if somebody comes to us and they want to do a particular kind of activism, we have this coalition of groups who do all these different things, and these relationships, that are being able to be built with other organizations where, everything's just a bit more collaborative and unified. And I'm really liking that the movement is going in that direction. And like I've already said, you have a large part to do with that. I want to ask you, you touched on it a little bit when you were talking about your mission, but you mentioned cage-free campaigns and shrimp campaigns. Why those campaigns? And just kind of tell us a little bit about those and the work you're doing.
Yeah, sure. So the campaign to end battery cages is almost just as much as fur or vivisection or any of the hallmark campaigns of the movement is a decades old campaign. Essentially, these campaigns started in the more or less like the 50s, when people were sort of coming out of World War II, less focused on just surviving, and now focused on the reality around them when they're getting back home. And we're starting to realize, like, basically, like, under cover of night, when people weren't paying attention, all of these animals were being moved from traditional settings outdoors indoors, and not only indoors but into these tiny cages where you're trapping 5 to 6 hens in a single barren battery cage. They're standing on wire floors. They can't spread their wings. They can't turn around. It's completely unnatural life, and it is like sort of, I think, like the classic example of treating animals not as sentient beings, but as cogs in the machine that output food for humans. And immediately, like, once people became aware that this is what was happening to animals, people started speaking up. And so groups in the UK started doing street activism, calling attention to this, and asking people, and raising awareness around getting animals out of battery cages. People are writing books about, like Ruth Harrison, about the terrible things that are happening on factory farming, and this, like, just like rampant production and sacrificing the lives and the well-being of animals just so they can have more output. And over time, the battery cage campaign I think becomes sort of adjacent to other issues like vivisection and fur, like a main, like sort of a hallmark of the movement. Even groups like PETA in the 2000s and 90s were working on cage-free campaigns before there were these divides that people invented between welfarism and abolition. And for me and for ICAW, I think at this moment, there's been such tremendous momentum globally for this issue. Thanks in part to funding coming into the movement, but thanks mostly to activists focusing on this campaign and dedicating their time to winning. I think for ICAW now, I think our role in this space is many of the largest companies in the world have already committed to ending this. They said, over the last 10 years, most of the world's largest companies have said, we're going to end battery cages. And what we're seeing now in 2025 is so many of the campaigns I worked on when I was just getting started in the cage-free campaigns, these companies are like, they've made progress, but they're not following through on this commitment to completely end this. And so for campaigns that we're working on now, like Marriott, this company committed in 2013 to saying and said, we're going to completely end battery cages everywhere in the world. And now it's 2025. They're 12 years into that commitment, and they're sitting at about 50% globally. And it's the responsibility of these companies to put their money where their mouth is and get these animals out of cages. And I think that's where we want to focus our attention, is ending this once and for all, everywhere we can, getting animals out of cages. So for me, this is like the hallmark welfare campaign. On shrimp, this is like a much newer campaign. Frankly, even if folks wanted to work on shrimp welfare, they couldn't have until now, because we didn't even know what the right thing to ask for shrimp was. We didn't know. Obviously the numbers of shrimp being farmed is going up and up and up. We estimate it's probably about 450 billion individuals every single year, and that's only the shrimp that are being sold on grocery store shelves around the world. That's not the shrimp who die on the farm. So the number is probably even greater. So like, if we can do anything to reduce the suffering of these animals, probably we can't run campaigns to end the consumption of shrimp, but we can do something to reduce their suffering, and it reduces a tremendous amount of suffering. And so the two asks for this campaign, one, asking companies to end this horrific practice called stock ablation, in which individual, basically mother shrimp that lay eggs, are taken individually and have a single one of their eyes cut off their head with a hot blade, and then they'll live their entire lives partially or completely blinded for about 2 years. And research even shows this is the reason they do this is because theoretically it's meant to make the mother shrimp lay more eggs, so you get higher output. Same reason as factory farmers do all these terrible things to animals, they get a higher output. Research actually shows it doesn't do anything. So like, there's absolutely no reason for companies to continue to support this type of practice other than that it is a standard industry practice. But it's certainly like one of the most blatantly horrific things that you can see being done to animals on factory farms, having their eyes cut off of their heads. So that's one part of the ask. And the other part of the ask is the way shrimp are currently slaughtered in hundreds of billions all around the world is they're raised in these large pools, basically like in, terrible conditions. And then when it comes time for slaughter, they scoop them out with a big net, and theoretically, they're meant to be put on ice in a practice called ice slurry. And the farmers have been saying for years, oh yeah, the ice renders them unconscious, and then they don't even feel anything. The reality is, virtually all shrimp in the world are farmed in tropical environments, in India, in Latin America, in Southeast Asia, before they're shipped to affluent countries like the US and Europe to be consumed. And so we're talking about the hottest places on Earth, and you're theoretically dragging ice into the middle of like jungles or hot or very humid hot climates, and then effectively stunning shrimp. It's not happening. Even if it was, research shows in the best possible conditions, you're taking a shrimp and putting it in ice, and it's not even unconscious or not feeling pain for 30 seconds to a minute. Even in that case, that's terrible. And the reality is, most shrimp are just suffocating to death for minutes to hours. And so, what we're asking companies to do is basically end this practice and move to a practice where shrimp are stunned immediately on electric stunners. They don't feel anything, and then they don't experience suffocation as they're being slaughtered for human consumption. So far in that campaign, we've gotten around a dozen major European retailers already to commit to both of these asks. And those asks collectively will impact billions of animals every single year once the companies fulfill, which will be in the next 1 to 2 years, if we can build a strong enough movement to force these companies not only to commit, but to get them across the line. And so anyway, these are the two major campaigns we're working on. And then, for the future, when we're thinking about more campaigns we might tackle, could be other types of factory farming like aquaculture, fish, even insect farming. We know now insects suffer tremendously, and they suffer in the trillions per year. So all these things could be possibilities in the future. But the baseline of any of this, if we're going to be successful on achieving any of these welfare reforms, is building a bigger, broader movement that's willing to show up and take action against these companies to force them to commit and follow through on any key welfare thing.
I know there's still a lot of work to do, but everything you've accomplished so far is really impressive. And I'm glad that there are some competent people doing that important work. Um, I think that, I think that most of the people who listen to this podcast are probably already animal rights activists or people who are, vegan or lean that way and, or at least interested in activism. Um, I mean, I don't think that I really knew the full extent of what these shrimp go through until I saw ICAW's campaign against Aldi, the grocery stores, and I saw a really beautiful action with a lot of folks from different European countries at an Aldi. I think it was in Germany, and yeah, some of the speak outs and some people were wearing TVs that showed the footage of what happens to them. And, I mean, obviously we shouldn't be killing animals at all, but my goodness, like what they're going through is just pure torture to suffocate and to have your eyes cut off. I mean, for me, I would, I would ultimately consider myself an abolitionist, but I think about this, think about like prison abolitionists. Okay. Would you say, oh, I'm not going to participate in a campaign to ask prisons to stop cutting prisoners' eyeballs off because I think that the prisoners should just be free? That's crazy. And part of what actually got me thinking more about welfare campaigns is something that a former member of the ALF said, a comment that they made that, they said, hey, I served time in prison and obviously I didn't want to be in there at all, but there are little things in there that help me keep going, like writing letters and having phone calls and, people who are advocating for me to have vegan food and to make my experience as good as it can be while I'm in there. And yeah, I mean, that got me thinking about the reduction of suffering. Obviously, if we could just free all these animals right now, we would have done it already. But I know that if it were me, obviously I'd want to be out of there. But if I couldn't get out of there, I would at least not want my eyeballs chopped off, and I would at least not want to suffocate to death. I mean, that's just sounds like one of the worst ways to die and suffer. I mean, it's just terrible. So with that being said, what might you say to any people who consider themselves abolitionists or maybe more significantly anti-welfarists? what would you say to the people that are listening to this and listening to what these animals are going through? Like what appeal would you make to them and how they can get involved in some of these campaigns?
I said, like, first and foremost, obviously activist time is limited, and we want to be focusing on the things that are most effective. And I mean, both things that call to us and allow our activism to be sustainable, but also things that are effective. And so with that in mind, even if this isn't the number one issue you care about, there's no reason why you can't work on multiple campaigns, just like I do. I'm working on foie gras, I'm working on fur, I'm working on welfare. Even though welfare is the thing that calls to me most, I can see these other issues are important for other reasons and fit into sort of other theories of change. What I'd say, I think, also is we have limited time on this earth, and I think this is the number one thing that calls to me is, like, I don't know how long I'll be here, and I've known for a very long time that I just want to wake up every day and help animals. And if you take that a step further and you say, not only do I want to wake up every day and help animals, but I want to wake up every day and help the most amount of animals possible, getting involved in a campaign that reduces the suffering of shrimp is certainly, if you look at your activism from a suffering reduction standpoint, this is certainly one of the most effective ways you could possibly be spending your time, because the campaigns are tractable. They can win. We've proven this over and over again. We've won dozens of policies from some of the largest retailers in Europe. So there's a good strategy. We know we can win. And then at the same time, we know that this is reducing just a tremendous amount of suffering for hundreds of billions of animals every single year. Even if this isn't, the number one thing that you're most excited about, why wouldn't you participate? And I think right now the options available to us are not like, I don't support this campaign and we can end the exploitation of shrimp entirely, or I do support this campaign and it'll be like I have to sacrifice every single other thing that I'm working on. The question really is just like, do you think shrimp deserve to not have their eyes cut off their head? Do you think they deserve to not suffocate to death? And if the answer is yes, why not simply show up for a protest or take some kind of effective action to win the campaign? Because this is what we will achieve if we're able to win. And not only for this campaign, not only for the Aldi campaign that we're currently running, which is one of the largest retailers in the world, but for all other retailers in Europe, all the retailers in the US, this sets a precedent that we can then roll onto every single other company and completely shift this industry away from two of the most horrific practices happening to hundreds of billions of animals every single year. And I guess the other thing, which was, when we're planning campaigns, when I think about campaigns, the number one thing I'm thinking about is how much animal suffering can I reduce right now. But I also think that when we go out and we run these welfare campaigns, there's not a single time where we're saying, we really support cage-free eggs, or we really support killing shrimp. We're only saying these things are bad. They're terrible, and you should stop doing them. It's the responsibility of these companies to spend money and end these practices. We're never sort of endorsing the positive side of those campaigns. And one thing on shrimp that's been really interesting is, I think, when I started the campaign at MFA, when I started telling people, I want to run this campaign to reduce tremendous amount of suffering for hundreds of billions of shrimp, people looked at me like I was fucking out of my mind, and we're like, nobody is going to care about this. The companies won't care about it. People won't care about it. Nobody cares about shrimp. They think they can't feel anything. They think they're water bugs and don't feel, can't feel any amount of pain. And immediately, the very first protest we did for shrimp, we had 70 people come out. We showed people footage of eye stalk ablation. The majority of people in the world have never heard of what eye stalk ablation is. They have no idea how shrimp ended up from some farm or to being on their plate. They probably think Tesco is going out and catching shrimp in the water, and they don't feel anything, and now I'm eating them. The reality of this is it could not be further from the truth. These are factory farmed animals. They feel pain, they suffer, and they're exploited and mutilated and suffocated. And we as activists can show up and change their lives for hundreds of billions of them every single year. I mean, that's like, I think, really powerful and inspiring. And if all it takes is an hour of your week to chip in and help make that happen, why wouldn't you participate? Like, why would you continue to stand on the fence and say, I don't care enough about this to even spend a little bit of my time taking an action that could help these animals in a significant way?
I think what you said about the phrasing, like you're not endorsing, people killing animals with what you're trying to do. And I've heard in a lot of the speak outs at these types of protests where people say, I specifically like this phrasing where people say, we're asking you to do the bare minimum for animals. And that is the bare minimum, like allowing a chicken to be able to spread their wings or to step on solid ground instead of the bottom of a wire mesh cage that cuts into their feet with every step that they take, and to be able to wander about and more easily get to water, or whatever the case may be. I mean, again, yes, we want all these animals to be completely liberated, at least most of us do, but yeah, I mean, just asking these giant companies to do the bare minimum. If we're having to do campaigns for them to do the bare minimum, that means total liberation's not really around the corner anytime soon, and we have to start somewhere. While we're talking about, kind of like we're talking about appealing to the people who are like abolitionists who might want to work on this campaign, and earlier we were sort of talking about unification in the animal rights movement and how great that can be and how scary that can be to those companies that abuse animals. I was watching a talk that you gave a few years ago, and you mentioned that it was kind of difficult for you to come out as trans because there was really this pressure in the animal rights movement to push the activists are quote unquote normal, like whatever that means. And, you're not the only person that I've heard that from. There's another person that I used to do activism with who worked for one of the bigger animal rights organizations, and they went by they, them pronouns, I think it was. And the organization was like, well, when you talk to the media, can you just go by he, him pronouns or something? Like that was just kind of the vibe. And I remember, being around for that, and I'm sure it still exists. I was wondering, if you think there's been any progress on that. If you want to share any of your personal story on that, you certainly can. And just if you want to expand on that in general, because yeah, I mean, for me personally, I think it's important to be welcoming to all different kinds of people, or else we're not going to have a very good movement.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, I think at the time that I started getting involved in the movement, um, there was not a lot of money um, anywhere. We didn't have big donors and foundations that were willing to give money to anybody. And so I think at the time we were a movement that was trying to punch above our weight class. And so like especially for the welfare groups, like I think there was a big emphasis on seeming normal, seeming like we are just another person, but we happen to care about animals, and we want to come off as professional and normal when we're doing our activism. And like this was sort of like shoved down our throat of like, you've got to be normal, you've got to be professional, you've got to look like you're just like everybody else. If you want to get these companies or politicians or anybody to do what we want, we can't seem like radical activists. We can't seem like, different than everybody else. And I think it's a fair point to consider when you're approaching activism of how you come across to other people. But I think a big thing that happened for folks like me, for transgender people or non-binary people at the time, was that we kind of got shoved into this box of like other, like not fitting in with society, or not coming across as like normal. And this is a really hard thing for me at the time, and I think probably prevented me from wanting to be open about my gender, or even like start hormones, because I didn't want to come off as you know the wrong type of activist. Um, where we're at now in the movement, I think things have changed a lot. Um, but and like I think generally it's been really cool, like since I've come out as a transgender woman, and people sort of like can see that and accept that. It's been mostly sort of like embraced from the animal rights community. There's still some challenging things, certainly, like things that have been revealed about gender dynamics and things like that I'm experiencing, and I'm treated, some situations treated differently than I had been in the past when people perceive me a different way. Um, but for the most part, I think things are getting better. But I think there's certainly more work to do about people educating themselves about these issues, um, even if for no other reason than to just like treat trans and non-gender conforming folks in the movement um, with more respect and understanding where they're coming from. That being said, I think one really cool thing for me in the last year, like since I've been way more involved in grassroots activism, and going to AAC events and showing up in person for local events, and doing street actions, is I think the community that y'all and now us all in the coalition are building is one that embraces all different types of people, whether it's like gender diverse people, or whether it's neurodivergent people, or any type of person who wants to get involved in activism. Your political beliefs, your religious beliefs is kind of like not the main thing, as long as people are showing up and having animals first in their mind. I think everybody has been really good at treating each other with respect. And I feel like despite the fact that I'm trans and I care mostly about welfare campaigns, I feel like I've been fully embraced by the community. And I don't know, it's just kind of been like a really heartwarming thing for me in the last year. And I also think that being like not a thing that I have to think about so much allows me to do my best work for animals, and focus just on winning these campaigns and showing up with my best self to every day to try to end the abuse and suffering of animals.
Yeah, I appreciate that perspective. I mean, it's not something that I really think a lot about. And when I was watching that talk that you gave, and I mean, you really didn't dive deep into that story or anything. You just kind of casually mentioned it almost, I feel like. And it just, I don't know, like it just sort of broke my heart, especially since like I said, I'd heard somebody else say something like that. I'm like, if we're not creating a welcoming movement, what kind of movement do we even have? You know what I mean? So, but I'm glad to hear that, the grassroots, has made you feel comfortable at least. um,
Right, comfortable in some ways. Yeah, more uncomfortable beds.
comfortable
More
beds.
more
Yeah.
more comfortable, like socially.
Sleeping on the floor is not as comfortable. Well, we mentioned some of the campaigns that you're involved with. The campaign that we were talking about that I first attended a protest of was Marriott. So I know there's the campaign, Marriott going cage free. We briefly mentioned that Aldi campaign to end eye stalk ablation and the eye slurry with shrimp. Is there anything else that ICAW is working on, specifically when it comes to welfare? I know that as part of the coalition, you're working on the anti-fur campaigns and the anti-foie gras campaigns as well. But when it comes to ICAW specific campaigns, is there anything else we should be looking out for or trying to get involved in?
Yeah, sure. So we basically have three campaigns. Um, One is our Marriott campaign, and this is more our global cage-free campaign. So if we win on Marriott, it'll impact every single hen across all the hotels that they're operating in, and that includes hotels in Asia, Latin America, Africa, everywhere they are. Their commitment is to be 100% cage-free globally, and so like that's what we're fighting for. For Aldi, the ask is to implement these shrimp welfare standards in Europe. So this is primarily a European campaign. Aldi operates all across Europe, and so folks who want to get involved in that campaign um, in Europe, like anybody, could take action tomorrow. Um, our third major campaign is against the another giant retailer called Ahold Delhaize, and Ahold Delhaize is a company I have a long history with. Back in 2016, when most of my work was meeting with companies, negotiating policy, and sort of like threatening them in boardrooms. Uh, I met with both Ahold and Delhaize when they were two separate companies in the U.S., and both of them told me to my face, "We're going to commit to going 100% cage free by 2025. That's our goal." Flash forward 10 years, these companies have now combined. They've merged, and Ahold Delhaize is now one company. Uh, they're meant to be 100% cage free in the U.S. in a month, and they are certainly nowhere near fulfilling that commitment. The reason this campaign is so significant is what we're demanding from this company is uh, even if they're not going to be 100% cage free immediately, it would be impossibly logistically at this point because they haven't put in the work to get there. What we want to see is a clear path, a clear plan to completely end battery cages as quickly as they possibly can. And the reason this matters so much is because a win from Ahold Delhaize, a company that operates grocery stores like Stop and Shop, Giant, Hannaford, Food Lion, all these grocery stores that everybody knows in the Northeast and Mid Atlantic. If we can get this company to publish this commitment, a specific plan, we can then take this plan and bring it to every other grocery store in the U.S. and say, if Ahold can do it, you can do it, and sort of shove that down their throats. And where we're at in the U.S. right now is when I started cage-free work in 2015, we were at about 5% cage-free. Flash forward 10 years, we've got hundreds and hundreds of corporate commitments. We've got legislation in states like California, Massachusetts, Oregon, Washington, saying not only can you not produce eggs coming from hens raised in battery cages, you can't even sell them in our states. So we've had a tremendous progress in those 10 years. All these companies committing, all these states banning battery cages, both the production and the sale of any egg coming from a hen trapped in a cage for her whole life. And yet, we're only at about 50% cage free. So huge progress. We go from 5% to 50%. That's hundreds of millions of animals out of cages. But we still got this remaining chunk, about 50% of the egg supply that is still hens kept in battery cages. We've probably gotten all of the state bans that we can. Maybe there's a couple more, but we're not going to win on issues like that from a legislative perspective in red states and things like that. So our only option is forcing these retailers to follow through on their corporate commitments. And the majority of those eggs, that 50%, are sold on grocery store shelves. It's the grocery stores that we need to focus on. And so if we get Ahold, we can move on to any other grocery store, Kroger, Albertsons, Walmart. If Ahold can do it, any of them can do it. And once we set a precedent, we can roll and get every animal, get every hen out of cage, out of battery cages in the U.S. And like this is like the beginning. We win Ahold, then it sets us on a path to a country that's completely banned battery cages by legislation or by corporate commitments.
So, what businesses can people look out for in their communities? I know you mentioned Ahold Delhaize owns like Food Lion, Stop and Shop, Giant, and some others. I know Marriott owns a slew of different brands as well. Can you just maybe rattle off some of those just so if people hear it, they're like, oh, I could get involved locally?
Yeah, for anybody who wants to get involved in these campaigns, we have actions that anybody could take in their local community. This is a big part of ICAW's strategy is local grassroots organizing. And so for Ahold, um, there's a brand called Hannaford. That's like they're in the far northeast in Maine and New England. Stop and Shop, that's also in New England down through New York. Giant in sort of like Philly area and the surrounding areas around Philly and New Jersey. Um, Giant also in DC and Maryland and Virginia and that area, and then Food Lion in North Carolina, South Carolina, um, and all throughout there. So anywhere you are, probably from South Carolina up through Maine in the Northeast, you could get involved in these campaigns, and you could reach out to ICAW, you could reach out to AAC, and we'll be able to put you in touch with folks who can show you how to do impactful local activism for that campaign. For Marriott, literally anywhere you are in the world, there's a fucking Marriott. Our strategy around Marriott is probably targeting their highest end locations. I think this is the place where we can have the greatest impact. And so a lot of the focus has been Ritz-Carlton, one of their highest end brands. But anywhere you are, there's going to be some expensive hotel that's owned, operated, managed, franchised, licensed by Marriott. And the protests, I think, are driving this company forward. They've jumped, I think, somewhere around like since we started the campaign to now, they've jumped like 20% in terms of their cage-free purchasing. And we just want to keep driving this forward and force them ultimately to follow through on this commitment and set a precedent and show companies what happens to companies who don't meet their commitments to animals. And so, like, anywhere you're in the world, you're not sure what to do, anybody can get involved in the Marriott campaign. And if you're in the Mid-Atlantic or Northeast, you can get involved in the Ahold campaign.
I've witnessed some really epic actions against Marriott at Ritz-Carlton and JW Marriott, Luxury Collection, some of those. But I think the action that I've been the most impressed by is this action against Denise Naguib when she was giving a talk at George Washington University. And hopefully some of the people listening have seen the video for that already. Maybe I can link that in the show notes or something. But could you just give us like a little bit of your perspective from that action, just like a little peek behind the curtain?
Yeah. So basically, we got tipped off that Denise, who is the global vice president of sustainability at Marriott International, she's completely in charge of their cage-free commitment. So all the decisions around cage-free sourcing and their sustainability policies related to animal welfare is controlled by this woman, Denise Naguib. And we got tipped off that she would be speaking at George Washington University in Washington, D.C. This was right in the heart of our Marriott Week of Actions, which was incredible. Activists taking action in dozens of cities all around the world for the campaign. Really incredible momentum for the campaign built that week. But in solidarity with the Week of Actions, we wanted to show up and raise the issue to Denise. So it was an open talk. At least that's what the event said. So we took that at face value. We sent about six activists who were working on the campaign into the room to confront Denise directly and ask her about the cage-free policy. We had a team of folks, including myself, waiting outside to raise awareness about Marriott's inaction on this issue. And essentially the action started as soon as Denise started speaking, and activists stood up, went to the front of the classroom, and brought this directly to Denise. She had nothing to say about it meaningful. She was simply saying, now's not the time to talk about this. This isn't the right place. We asked her where the right place is. She didn't have an answer. She lied to the class also. She said she has no power over the types of eggs that Marriott purchased. We know for a fact she has complete power over their CSR policies and their cage-free commitments. She said the activists are trying to get them to go cage free in places where it's not even possible. Marriott's had 13 years to figure it out, and they haven't yet. We know for a fact every single country that they operate in, there are either cage-free eggs available or solutions that they can put in place immediately to end battery cages within a few months. So this is a complete lie. She knows this.
We should mention too that when she said this, it was probably because she didn't think any more activists were in the room, but there were.
Yeah. And so, we certainly called attention to that in front of the whole room. And I think one really powerful thing that she did say, one actual fact that that was not a complete lie, was that activists are showing up outside of Marriott hotels all over the world almost every single day. People are taking to the street and taking action, and she just expects that she's going to be disrupted anytime she speaks, that their hotels are going to be protested. And this is purely because of the grassroots animal rights movement showing up, caring about this campaign, going out in local communities and taking action. So proof positive that from the senior executives at Marriott all the way up to the board members of Marriott, everyone knows about this campaign. Everyone knows about this issue. They know we're not going to go away. They know we're going to keep showing up. So for the activists currently engaged in the Marriott campaign, I just want to say thank you for participating. This is one of the largest companies on earth, a $25 billion company, largest hospitality company in the world. And we're bringing them to their knees simply by showing up and protesting in the street. And for any activists out there interested in getting involved, please reach out to ICAW. The more, the merrier. This is like the way you can get involved in ending battery cages globally. So anyway, yeah, super exciting campaign, super exciting action. And I think was really rewarding to hear directly from the decision maker on Marriott's sustainability policies that the campaign is frustrating. And I guess if Denise watches this or Denise is listening, we'll see you soon. Wherever you're speaking, we were going to be there. And we'll be outside your hotels every single day. So you're welcome to come talk to us and tell us why you're not fulfilling your policy. And happy to negotiate, but certainly not willing to end the campaign for any means other than Marriott being 100% cage free.
And for anybody who doesn't believe us when I say ICAW is the real deal when it comes to collaboration with these other campaigns, Chrys, I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about a big event that happened earlier this year, the Rage Tour, which was, I believe, 20 or 25 days of action or something crazy like that. It was like a tour all the way from Boston down to Atlanta. And man, there were so many epic actions, so many actions like per day, so many like new people that have come into the fold. I'd just like to hear your perspective on that and what it was like to work on foie gras campaigns, fur campaigns, and cage-free campaigns all at the same time.
Yeah, I mean, it was super fun. I think the idea for the tour came from my early experiences in activism, which was doing individual outreach, like distributing vegan literature with the Humane League and Vegan Outreach on Warp Tour. Basically, like back then, activists would just follow the Warp Tour and leaflet every single person coming in and out of the event with vegan literature. And I thought it was an incredible sort of movement building event, mostly for the activists who were on tour, because it was this building solidarity, going to local communities. Locals would come out and join the touring people, and we would all take an action together, to try to educate people about these issues. Then I thought, well, what if we take this model and we apply it to pressure campaigns? And so, I think about, I got to attend the incredible Animal Activism Collective Convergence in New York City last year. And we had, foie gras actions, we had fur actions, and then for the first time ever, we had welfare actions. And it's sort of like all these activists coming into New York City from all around the country and all across the world to take action together. And this is just incredible solidarity. Then it's like, what if we combine these kinds of ideas and we take the idea of having basically a third split. We're doing a third welfare, a third local campaigns, including foie gras, and we take it on the road. So rather than bringing activists to a certain city, we go to the cities themselves and do activism with the activists all throughout the summer. So you don't have to go anywhere. We'll come to you, and we're going to have really fun, exciting demos, and hopefully bring out new activists to get involved in the campaigns. Huge results from this from Rage Tour this year. One thing we did not expect was basically every city we stopped in, we picked up new activists along the way. So we had folks jumping on tour with us in Boston on the very first day. We did Omni Hotels protest, and from there we had 2 activists decide to give up their entire summer to come on tour and do activism all summer. We picked up folks in New York, we picked up folks in DC, we picked up folks in Charlotte, and by the end in Atlanta, it was like an even bigger crew with folks that had never done activism before, and now they're experienced activists doing activism with us all summer and have gone back home and brought that experience back and have continued their activist journey. And I think like this is a really exciting model for the future. But the other big results from Rage Tour, every single city we stopped in, basically, we had a big emphasis on taking action for the Omni Hotels foie gras campaign. And in New York City, especially, we had huge emphasis on taking action for the campaign against Condé Nast and Vogue to end featuring fur in any of their publications. Tour ended the end of August, and I think just a few months later, after all those actions and after people kept up the pressure on both of those companies, Vogue and Condé Nast committed to never selling fur ever again. Omni Hotels, after a year of tireless efforts from activists all over the country, committed to banning foie gras from their menus permanently. And so, like, I think for the coalition and building solidarity and building activists, like this is the entire ethos of what we're trying to do out here. Is like build more activists, take action for pressure campaigns, and win these campaigns. And I think for all those reasons, like Rage Tour, I think was a huge success in terms of like both building communities, building new activists, and also winning these critical campaigns. And yeah, I couldn't be more stoked to give up my entire summer next year to hit the road and drive for 1 month to 2 months, go into local communities and doing activism.
It was so exciting. I only got to join for maybe like a week or maybe a little less, but it was so exciting. Just and I joined at the end of the tour. So, I thought everybody would be kind of like run down and sort of like dragging, but the vibe was immaculate. It was wonderful there. And you could feel the energy, especially I think from some of the newer people who had never worked on campaigns before, some of the people who probably are the ones that just kind of said, "Hey, I'll jump in the van and go on a tour," last minute or whatever. And yeah, it was so cool. I met brand new people. I've been around for a little while. Sometimes it feels like I know everybody, but so when I meet somebody new, I'm like, wow, especially somebody who's who I can align with and who are kind of like working on the same types of things that I'm working on and sort of living in that same world. So it was so cool to see, and I'm so glad that ICAW brought that to fruition. And I want to personally thank you, Chrys, and ICAW, because ICAW, a welfarist organization, instrumental in those wins against Vogue magazine, Condé Nast, and with Omni dropping foie gras. And yeah, I think what we've been able to achieve together is amazing, and I hope that Marriott or Ahold Delhaize are next, and if they are, I'm going to be really excited when that happens.
Yeah, same. I think if I'm being honest, probably when I started doing the work in grassroots and showing up for foie gras and for demos, it was mostly a solidarity thing. Like welfare is what calls to me, and that's what I'm most excited about. But I respect these activists, and I really want them to care about my campaigns too. And I think that's changed over time. Like at this point, I'm pretty much like just as stoked about winning Vogue or Omni as I would be about winning Marriott or any of the campaigns that I started. We were out in Boston last week, mostly working on Ahold Delhaize stuff all day with the Humane League and other groups involved up there. And every night we wake up at 6:30 in the morning and go protest Ahold. And by 7:30, 8 p.m. at night, we're outside of a local restaurant called Pammy's with Chainsaw Boston up there. And we won Pammy's this week after a week of protests. And I feel like I was like virtually just as stoked about winning that campaign as I have been about like getting major policies from multi-billion-dollar companies. Just like, I don't know, pressure campaigns beget pressure campaigns, and I think like building not only solidarity but just like just excitement around other people's activism is like how we build a stronger, bigger movement that can win on any issue.
I feel a momentum. I'm sure you can feel it too. It feels like momentum. And that month of October that you were referring to, where uh, Omni went foie gras free, Vogue and Condé Nast went fur free, and there was just so much happening that month. There were like a couple of ALF raids that happened that month, coincidentally, and then man, there was something else. I think it was it Boston Fashion Week,
Yeah.
October. I think it was. I can't even keep up with all the victories that happened. I'm sure there were probably some local wins.
Dozens of local foie gras policies. I know, like I see the updates that people in Portland are killing it, and in DC, and I mean it's just like seems like win after win. Yeah, and hopefully we'll see soon some of these big welfare campaigns finally end. But either way, there's never like it feels like there's never a week now where we're not coming out of it with some kind of win for animals, which is like incredibly exciting.
Yeah. That month of October just felt like a culmination of so much work and solidarity that's been happening. So it was just an incredible month for victories. And um, with that behind us, even though I'm sure we're still like reeling about it, what are you excited about? Like, what about animal rights? It's easy for us to be depressed all the time because of what's happening to the animals, but right now I'm excited. So I'm wondering what you're excited about and looking forward to in the movement.
Yeah, I mean, the number one thing that I'm most excited about is movement building. Like, I've spent the majority of my career thinking, like, for the campaigns I'm working on, we're never going to have people power. And so we come up with all these tactics that are irritating to companies. Like, I got really skilled at negotiations and meeting companies face to face. And now, I'm 13 years into my career and I'm spend far less time in the boardroom with companies and far more time on the street yelling at companies. And I think this is purely just because I think for the future of the movement, for anything we want to win, whether it's cage-free campaigns, shrimp campaigns, foie gras campaigns, fur campaigns, vivisection campaigns, corporate campaigns, legislative campaigns, the engine that makes any of this go is people power. And I think between the coalition and everything we're building this year, and where we're going in 2026, I think there's like so much to be excited about in terms of building a bigger, broader movement that's capable of winning even greater things in the future. And I'm just like looking at my schedule for this year. I've basically dedicated my time to being on the road about like 90% of the time, doing local activism or participating in big events. And we've got convergence is scheduled all throughout the year. Lots of ways people can get involved with the Animal Activism Collective. This will be announced soon, but we're planning on hosting our first ever conference amongst the coalition groups. We're likely going to be doing tour in July, Rage Tour again in July and August in the US and Europe for the first time ever. So like there's going to be tons of ways for people to get involved. If you've never done animal activism before, if you're excited about winning campaigns, you're excited about helping animals, all throughout this year, there's going to be like super exciting opportunities. And I'm just super excited to meet new activists, bring them into the fold, and work together towards any of the pressure campaigns that we're trying to win.
Before I let you go, Chrys, I've got one last question. And that is, what advice would you have for anybody who's like starting out in animal rights or animal welfare right now? Anybody who's just sort of fresh coming into this movement and trying to figure out their way, what would you say to them?
Yeah, I think the number one thing, and what I did when I got involved in activism is I didn't know what I was doing, but I just showed up. So thanks in large part to AAC and the motivation of other grassroots organizations. There's a bunch of local groups all around the country that are already doing effective campaigning. And I would say show up, go to the protests. You might be uncomfortable at first, but over time you'll get more and more comfortable. And if there's nothing going on in your particular city, you can make that happen. Anybody can make it happen. All it really takes is one or two dedicated individuals to hit the streets and take action for animals. And if you don't know exactly where to get started, or you want a little help, or you want a little support, my recommendation would be reach out to Animal Activism Collective. The mentorship program is back up and running, and taking new mentors for this year and into 2026. And so, like, if you're not sure what exactly you want to do, how you want to get involved in activism, but you want to help animals, I think the go-to place to start on your journey is Animal Activism Collective mentorship program, or get involved with a local group and start showing up for the protests and meeting people. The only way to help animals is to show up for them every single day. And I think that's sort of like what anybody getting involved in their journey should focus on as they're getting started.
Chrys, I really appreciate you taking some time out of your busy schedule to chat with me and provide some insight into your story. We've been working together for, I guess, about 9 months now, and to be able to like sit down and actually have some time set aside to get to know you better has been really cool for me, and I know listeners will get a lot out of this, so I super appreciate you taking the time.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Thanks for thinking of me, and thanks for everything AAC is doing. It's been just like an incredible collaboration this year, and I'm super stoked for next year. See what we can do as a coalition.
Yep, I'm sure I'll be seeing you on the streets pretty soon. I really hope you got a lot out of that conversation. It was good to just be back as a host and get to sit down with someone and learn more about their story and their perspective in animal rights. So I hope that you'll rate and review the podcast. It helps others find it more easily. And the more people listen, the more people will be inspired to take action for animals. If you're watching on YouTube, we hope you'll like and subscribe for the same reasons, and maybe even leave us a comment. If you enjoy the Animal Liberation Hour podcast and want to support our work at Animal Activism Collective, please consider joining our Patreon for as little as $2 a month. This goes such a long way in helping us grow the animal rights movement through mentorship, as well as continuing to take bold action for animals. Don't forget to follow us, Animal Activism Collective, on TikTok, Facebook, and Instagram. If you haven't already heard, there's a big event coming to Los Angeles, the AAC LA Convergence. It's January 23rd through February 1st. We're hosting 10 jam-packed days of animal rights activism in LA. Check out our link tree to learn more about the AAC LA Convergence. You are not going to want to miss this one. One more reminder that you can sign up for a free mentor to help you with your animal rights activism at animalactivismcollective.com. Someone who will cater a mentorship specifically for you and help you become the most effective activist that you can be. If you needed a sign that you should take action for animals, this is it. Remember, it will take all of us to achieve animal liberation, so stay focused, stay positive, be effective, and keep doing your part. Until next time.